Hello, good people, and welcome to Finest Skills Hub. Here, we learn, we connect, and we grow. In this full dashboard lesson, we are going to learn how to bring your numbers to life. We are going to create an interactive income statement dashboard that allows you to compare your performance over years. With some colorful insights, we are also going to be able to spot patterns in some areas. We'll take it from the journal and then walk you through all the data analytics tools in Excel, Power Query, Power Pivot, pivot tables, slicers, and end up with this interactive dashboard that will give you and your users some insights. If this is the first time you are joining us on this channel, please subscribe so you don't miss out on any of our subsequent dashboards. So join me in Excel and let's go through this shortly.
So here is our income statement dashboard. It contains 2 years of financial data, so I'm able to switch between the 2 years to compare. So I have 2019 and 2020 here. As I switch these slicers, I get the numbers updated. Apart from this, if you have any dimension you want to analyze your income statement by, you can also use a slicer on that. So I have this division slicer that also drills down on each division, showing me the performance. Now, apart from this, I also have each line of the income statement visualized. Here I can compare the current and previous, the change, and also the performance over the 12 months for that particular year. So here I'm able to also see the high and low points in this period. I also have this monthly slicer that allows me to see the performance for that particular month. So if I select, I'm able to see whether we did well or not using this net income margin donut chart. So for the periods that we did well, it turns green and I get this tick. If we did not do well, it turns red and I get this X. Okay, so here you can easily pick the red and green to see where you did well and where you did not do well. It is this kind of interaction and insights we want to give users, and hopefully we can build it together in the next few minutes. So let me walk you through the process. First, we'll start with our journal. So this is just a basic recording of each transaction, whether it's a debit or credit, the amount and then the account involved. From here, we would also use the chart of accounts, which gives the details of each account to help us arrange it for our income statement. Now, with these two, we'll go to Power Query and then draw our 3-dimension tables and our fact table. So here we'll create a detailed calendar table and also a division table to help us create our slicer for division, and then our chart of accounts to give us some detail on each account, then also our journal. So with these 3-dimension tables and fact table, we are able to create that comprehensive income statement dashboard. Now we need to make these tables talk to each other. So we'll use Power Pivot to create a data model, using the relationship that exists in these tables. Once we are done, we'll now use the pivot table to create a summary income statement, then use slicers and cube functions to create a flexible layout and calculation, and then we'll create our dashboard from this point. Of course, it's interactive, so once the data source updates, some of these lines would also get updated when you refresh. So that is how we are going to be doing this. Let's get started. So here we have 2 tables, the journal, which, as I said earlier, records the transaction, the account to debit, the account to credit, and then the amount involved. So this represents one record for each transaction. Then we go all the way down. Then we also have our chart of accounts. So here for each account code, we have details on the account name, whether it's an income statement or a balance sheet line, the category we are going to be using to group and analyze. Then we have a C or D for debit or credit, which we'll use to create a trial balance reporting value, and then an account grouping. So with these 2 tables, we are going to extract all the queries we'll need to create our income statement dashboard. This is not a table, even though it looks like one. So I'm going to insert a table So I'll come here, insert a table. Okay, and I click OK. Then I have my table design here. Then I can name this. So I'm going to name this journal to make it easier for me to reference in Power Query and other calculations. Then I come to my chart of accounts, do same. I can also do Control T instead of inserting a table directly. Then this also is converted into a table. So I'll come here and then name this chart of accounts COA. Okay, so I have converted these two into a table. I will now come and load this into Power Query. So standing in this table, I'll go to data, and this table / range icon is here. So I'll click and this opens my Power Query. So in Power Query, we can do a lot of transformation, clean the data. So I'll look at my journal query which has come in here and check my data type. So here, instead of date and time, I'm going to convert this to a proper date. Okay, to replace the current step. So I have this, I have my division in place, I have my description, and I have my debits and credits in 2 columns. Now, what is in 2 columns is not going to help our analysis. So we need to find a way to group the debit and credit in 1 column and the account in 1 column, so that we can easily match it with the amount here. And this is where we'll create our double entry in 2 lines. I'm going to highlight the debit and credit columns, right click, and unpivot these 2 columns. Okay, so when I do that, I now have for each transaction a debit and credit and the account involved. Okay, so let me rename this attribute type. Okay, and then I'll name this account. Okay, now for easy calculation, we want to create a trial balance reporting value. So essentially, we want to make all debits negative and then all credits positive. In some cases, it's the other way around, but for this particular calculation, we want all the debits to be negated. So to do that, I'm going to add a column based on a formula. So I'll come to the add column here and then create a custom column. Okay, so this custom column is going to be called TB value or TB amount. Okay, and I'm going to use this formula if the type, okay, which contains debit or credit, is equal to debit. Okay, then take the original amount, I'll put it in square brackets and multiply by -1, else give me the original amount. Okay, so it appears everything is okay here. So I expect a new column to be created when I do this. Okay, so here we have our revenues coming in as a credit and our expenses coming in as a debit. Once you have this, it is important you check the data type and then convert this into a proper whole number. So just a final walkthrough, I have my TB amount, I have my account here, I have my type, I have my original amount column here, and then I also have my other columns here, date, division, description, and all that. Now let's bring in our chart of accounts. So when we brought in the journal, it used this M code. Okay, so I'm going to copy this M code, Control C, and then come in and then create a new query. Okay, so from other sources, I'll create a blank query and then paste this here. It's from the same workbook, so I'll change the journal to COA. Okay, and then when I enter, it brings me the content. So I'm going to name this COA so that I can reference it. I'll walk through my data types. This is formatted as a number, which is fine. We use it for sorting. This is fine. And my categories and all are formatted properly, so I'll leave it as it is. So we now have our journal and we also have our chart of accounts. We'll need a slicer on division, and this can be found here in the journal. So I'm going to reference and create a copy of the journal. Okay, so here I'm going to name this division to create this dimension. So I'll create this division, and it is coming from this column. So I'll right click and remove all other columns, and then once I have this column, I will now remove duplicates so that I have just my 4 divisions, and I'll create a slicer out of this. Okay, so we are left with one more dimension which will help us analyze our numbers by date. So we need to create a calendar table. So to create a calendar table, we are going to use a simple custom M code to do this. So again, I will start a blank query, right click this space, new query, okay, other sources, and then start a blank query. Now I'm going to use the M code or this function number.from. Okay, so number.from will start creating a range of dates, and I'll start from this list point from the journal. So that function is list.min. Okay, then open my bracket and then call the name of the table journal. Okay, so in the journal I have my dates. So this is where I'm going to extract the minimum or the earliest date from. Then I'll close my bracket for list.min and then close my bracket for number.from. So this gives me the start point in my date range. I'll copy this, Control C, okay, bring in 2 dots, okay, to give me the range, and then I'll paste what I copied. So instead of the earliest date, I now need it at the latest date. So from this earliest date to the latest date, that is the range of dates I want to create. Okay, now I want a list, so I'm going to put curly brackets right after my equal sign. Okay, so this will bring me a dynamic date range so that when I bring in new entries in my journal, I have my calendar table updating. So I'll press enter and it generates this list, which I'm going to convert into a table. So I'll convert into a table, click OK. Okay, and I'll have my primary date column. So here I'm going to rename this date, format this properly as a date, okay, and then name my query as calendar. Okay, so I now have this, and from here I can draw any date attribute for my analysis. So selecting this date column, I can come to add, okay, and because I need a year slicer, I'll draw year from here. So I have 2019 and 2020 just to confirm. Okay, then I'll select my dates, come here again, and then draw my month values, which I'll use to sort. So I'll draw my month values from here, come here again, and I'm going to draw my month names. So month, name of month. Okay, so it comes in like that. I want these months abbreviated, so selecting the column, I'll go to transform, okay, and extract the first 3 characters. So I'll use first 3 characters, and then I get this abbreviated. Okay, so this is going to be a slicer, this is also going to be a slicer, and I've created my calendar table. So we now have our 3-dimension tables, calendar, division, and chart of accounts, helping us analyze the calculations we'll do in our journal. So we are done with our ETL process, and at this point we can go to home, close and load to, and then load this as a connection, and then add this to the data model. Then I'm going to click OK. So I now have all these queries loaded. Now once they are done, I will have to now go to Power Pivot to create my data model so that I can connect these 4 tables for my calculations. So after we have our queries in place, we'll go to Power Pivot. So this is my Power Pivot tab. Then I would go to Manage to see all my tables. Okay, so here I'm in the data view. I will switch to the diagram view. Okay, and I'm going to use this to create my schema. So as usual, we'll place the fact table in focus. So this is my journal. Okay, then I can connect it to these 3-dimension tables. So first, date will connect to date. Okay, then I have my division connecting to this division. Okay, then I will use my account to connect to this account. Okay, so this is going to be the schema, and once we are done, I can close this so that we can start creating our measures and our pivot table. Okay, so I'll close and then come and then create our calculation sheet. So in the calculation sheet, we are going to deal with 2 key measures: the reporting value, which will sum all our trial balance amounts, the one we created in Power Query, and then a calculation of the previous year. Okay, so I'll go to Power Pivot and then start a new measure. So I'll create a new measure from here. This is going to be sitting in my journal, so I'll call this reporting value, my current numbers. So I'll come here. It's going to be a simple sum, okay, of the TB amount in my journal. Okay, so this I'm going to format to 2 decimal place using 1000 separator, and I'll check everything is okay here, and I will click OK. Okay, so this gives me that first measure. Now my second measure is going to be the previous year's calculation. So again, I'll come to Power Pivot, right, create a new measure. So this is going to be previous year. And I'm going to use calculate. Okay, so I already calculated my reporting value. So I'll bring in my reporting value and then use same period last year, okay, on my calendar date. Okay, so when I do this, at every point in time, I can step back and then take the number last year. So this is also going to be formatted to 2 decimal places. I'll check my formula to be sure everything is okay, and then I'll click OK at this point. So at this point, we can create a simple pivot table. So I'll go to Insert Pivot Table from my data model. Okay, it's going to be in this existing worksheet. So once I'm here, I can draw any of these fields here into my areas. Okay, so for starters, let's draw the category, okay, into the row section. So I'll put this here. So I have all the lines here, including my balance sheet lines. Okay, then let's also put in our reporting value, which we put under the journal. So I'll bring my journal here and then put in my reporting value. So as expected, because this is a trial balance, it is now going to give me 0 when all these reporting values come in. So I'm also going to analyze this by the month. So to get the month, I'll go to the calendar view, okay, and then draw month names in the column section. So I have something like this. Okay, so it is this layout that we are going to use as a basis for calculating our income statement, at least as long as we have our trial balance balancing. We can proceed and then create our income statement with some confidence. Now, what we need to do is to take out the balance sheet lines. So to take off the balance sheet lines, I'll come to the chart of accounts and then use this income statement or balance sheet as a filter. Okay, so this way, when I come, I can now select only the income statement lines. Okay, so this will take away the assets, liability, and equity lines if they are present. So I'm now left with my revenue, finance cost, expense, and cost of goods sold. Of course, we would have to create some subtotals and also arrange this properly. So ideally we should have our revenue on top, followed by our cost of goods sold, then our expenses, then our finance costs. Then we are able to create a detailed income statement. Another challenge we have is that our months are not sorted properly. So I have it sorted alphabetically instead of chronologically. So here I need to also deal with this. We can do all this back in Power Pivot. So I'll go to my Power Pivot. Okay, go to manage. So over here, I'll go to my chart of accounts. Right now, you can take the category, okay, and sort it by the order of account code. So I can select the category column here and then sort this by the account code. Let's see what we get. So I want to sort by the account code column. Okay, this is going to result in an error. Okay, so because I have for the revenue lines multiple codes, right? So we have to find a way to group all revenue using one code. So we can create a calculated column for this to make it easier. So I'll come here, okay, and then add a calculated column. So this calculated column is going to bring the first number, okay, in each account code. So I'm going to use left to do that. So I'll take left of account code, okay, and here if I leave it at the first character, I'm going to get something that would read as text. So I have to run value around this, okay, to convert this into a proper number that I can use for sorting. Okay, so when I press enter, I should get the first values in there. So I can now use this to sort all the revenues, the cost of goods and all those things. Okay, so I'll come back here, category, sort by column, okay, and I'm going to use the calculated column I just did, and then I'll click OK. Okay, so we expect the categories which we are going to use for our financials to be sorted. Now let's do same for our calendar. So I'll come to month name, and then we are going to sort by the month value column. So I'll choose the month value column, and then I'll click OK. Okay, so with these two sorting done, if I go back to my worksheet, I expect the categories to be sorted properly, and then I have my month names also sorted properly. Okay, now there's a reason we used the TB values. Okay, you realize that now the expenses are negated. Okay, but we have a peculiar situation with finance costs, which ideally should be negated, but here it is made up of interest income and interest expense. So let me show you what is happening so that when you are applying this method, you know how to adjust accordingly. So I'll go to my field list, okay, and then bring in accounts under my categories. So when I do this, you realize that when I come to finance cost, my interest expense is negated and my interest income is positive. So it is a net of this that we are using for finance costs, and that was why it was important we negated the expenses. So please take note of this as we do our subtotals. Okay, so I'm going to take off the accounts. We are back where we started. Let's insert our slices. So I'll come to insert slices. Okay, so the slices we are going to need will be the year slicer. We also need the month name slicer, and then when we go to all, we also have our division slicer here. Okay, so these are the three slices we are going to use in our analysis. Okay, so I now have these. I can place them on standby. Okay, so with these done, we can now create our layout for our financials. So we need to calculate gross profit, EBIT, and all those things from here. But pivot tables will not make that possible because we can't insert rows, we can't insert columns. So we are going to convert this into cube functions, and because we pass through the data model, this can easily be done. So I'll stand in my pivot table, go to pivot table analyze under the OLAP tools. Okay, I'll convert this to cube formulas. So I have the option to include the filter, so I normally prefer adding that because I can use that in my calculations as well. So when I do that, we now have all these converted into cube formulas. Of course, it responds to our slices, okay, and that's the advantage that we get. Okay, so at this point, let's proceed and then put in our subtotals. So Alt IR at this point, and I'm going to calculate my gross profit. Okay, so once I calculate my gross profit, I can now also calculate my earnings before interest and tax. Okay, so then I'll take off my finance cost, and then I'll take off my tax. Okay, then I'll get my net income from here. Okay, so with this we can get rid of the grand total, and then we can proceed with our calculations. We now go ahead and then calculate our gross profit, right? So because the expenses are already negated, I'm just going to take this range, okay, and then create a sum of these two. Okay, then Control Enter, and I have something like this. So this is my gross profit. So if it helps, you can just put in an underline, Alt HBO. Okay, then we come to our earnings before interest and tax. Depreciation and all those things were grouped under expenses. So again, I'll highlight this, Alt HBO for my underline, and then I'll highlight this range up to December. Then I'll execute my auto sum. Okay, so Control Enter, and I have this. Okay, so again, we'll come and calculate our finance cost. So Alt HBO, and this has to be net income before tax. Okay, so that I get that calculation before my tax kicks in. So here I'm going to sum this as well. So equal to sum, and then Control Enter for this one. Okay, so now what we need to do is to calculate our tax. In Ghana, I'm using Ghana's tax rate of 25%. Okay, so we can now put in a boolean that says that if this value is greater than 0, okay, so I'll put this in bracket, then multiply that value by 25%, then I'll log this. Okay, so we have this. This will ensure that in the months that we don't make profits, we are not charged. Okay, then our final net income. So of course this has to be negated, so I will have to come back here, negate this, and then take this all the way. Okay, so we have something like this, just to be consistent with our calculations. And then finally I will create my net income. Okay, Control Enter, and I have this. Okay, so this now brings us to the calculation for our monthly values. Of course, the advantage is that it responds to our slices. Okay, so I can switch like that using my cube formulas. Okay, so now let's go in and calculate our current values and our previous year values as well. So I'm going to label this reporting value, which is our current. Okay, then I'll also label this as our previous year. Okay, Now here we already have our labels, which are cube members, right? So with cube members, we can use them as criteria, okay, in filtering our calculations. So let me just put a freeze pane here so that we can see the labels that we are calculating. So to get our reporting value, I'm going to use cube value. Okay, so cube value, we go to our data model. Okay, so we call our data model. Then you remember we calculated a measure here, so I'll bring in a double quote and then call our measures. Then I bring a dot. So when I bring a dot, the two measures that we calculated are here. So in this case, I'm looking for reporting value. Then I'll close this. Okay, then I have to proceed and then bring my other expressions. So for this purpose, we are looking at revenue, okay, which I said is a cube member, so it can fit as an expression. So I'm going to be copying this, right? So I'll lock this at the column level, right? So once I've done this, I need to be sure that the slicers I'm going to use, okay, can filter or slice these values, can slice this value I'm calculating. So I'll bring in the slicer for division, okay, bring in the slicer for month name, okay, and then bring in the slicer for year, and then I'll close this. Okay, so here I now get this dynamic calculation that is going to respond to my slicers. Okay, so if I click on January, it responds and so on. Now I need to copy this down for the rest. So when this comes here, because of my visual, I want this as absolute values. Okay, so I'm going to put an ABS function around this. Okay, so I'll close and then create an ABS function around this. Okay, so I can now copy this down for the cost of goods sold. Okay, and then copy this formula, select expenses, okay, which is one of the lines I'm going to calculate, select finance costs, okay, and then I can now paste. As you can see, the rest, the cells I've not selected are direct calculations, but these ones come from our model. That's why I am pasting the formulas here. So Control Alt V F to paste these formulas, and I'll format these appropriately. Okay, so now let me proceed and then create my subtotals. So because these are absolute values, okay, I'll put in an Alt HBO. My calculation is going to be a direct subtraction. Okay, so I'll have this. Okay, then I'll come in here as well. Then this is also going to be this minus that. Okay, but for finance costs, because of that switch, in this context we are going to still use sum, okay, for this. Okay, then I would copyright my formula for taxation. Okay, then from here I will sum this as well. Okay, so this calculation is done. I can now take this and then copy this right and then change the measure for my previous year. So with this done, I can just copy this right. Okay, now the only thing that I need to change here is the measure reporting value, which I need to switch to the previous year calculation. Okay, so I'll make this easier by highlighting the whole of this. Okay, then reporting value, replace this with previous year. So this is the advantage you have using cube formulas. So I'll click OK, and then I now have my current year values and then my previous values side by side. At this point, I can now proceed and calculate my changes. Okay, so now to calculate our changes, we need to make sure that in the years where we have negative turning to positive, we calculate this properly to take the percentage change. So the formula we are going to use is going to be current minus previous, okay, all this divided by the absolute value of your previous. So I'm going to put this here. Okay, so when I convert this to percentages, copy this down, and then we see what we have. Okay, so these are going to be our percentage changes. Now what we are going to do with this is to see the movements in each line. So if revenue change was good, it should show us green. Okay, if an expense change increased, it should show us red, because here we don't want expenses increased. So we now need to create a version of the percentage changes that would be relative to whether the line is an expense line or an income line. So revenue positive change is green, but expense positive change should be red. So to do that, we are going to create a version of this percentage change, but we'll use this type index, okay, to help us calculate the right percentage change, as I explained. So a positive change for revenue is good, so I'll put in 1. That for expense, cost of goods sold, is not good. Okay, so gross profit is good. This expense is not good. Okay, then EBIT positive change is good. Finance cost positive change is good. Net income before tax is good. And then for taxes, an increase is not good. So then our net income, an increase is good. So we are going to use these numbers to control what should be red, what should be green. Okay, so I'll use this to create a version of the change I call change X, which is simply multiplying, so which will simply be multiplying the original one by this index. Okay, so I have something like this. So it is this that we are going to use to chart the data bars that you saw there. Okay, so with these we can now use this to plot the data bars. But while we are here, let's make our tax also consistent with our previous calculations. So instead of negating this, I'll take off the negative values, okay, and then change this to this calculation instead. Okay, so that's this tax increase, okay, will reflect the negative change that we needed. So it's this kind of index that we'll need to now plot the red and green that you see here. Okay, so with this out of the way, let's calculate our green tick and X tick. Okay, so I'm going to call this label. So basically what I want to do here is that in the event we didn't do well, we should get an X, and then when we do well, we get a tick. So it is this green tick and X that we are going to work on at the moment. Okay, so it's a very simple calculation. First, we need to calculate our net profit margin, which is going to be on our reporting value. So this divided by our revenue. Okay, so this gives us that percentage. So I'll format this. Okay, and here we need to create a custom format. So that custom format is going to be created by pressing Ctrl 1. So Ctrl 1 brings me to format cells, and then I'll put in custom. Okay, so under type, I'm going to use the color code green, okay, to represent a positive number. So the green color that you saw there is color 10. Okay, so for the positive number, I want it to show green and a letter P. Now this P, when we format with Windings 2, will give us that tick. Then I'll put in a semicolon, and then for the negative numbers, I want a red, okay, in square brackets with the letter O. Okay, so now when I click OK, you just see the P and O in this case. But if I come home and then I choose Windings 2, okay, here I can now have this dynamic tick. Okay, so I can easily center that. So this will now be linked to our net profit margin. So when this is positive, we get a tick. When it's negative, we get an X. Okay, so this is going to be here. So next up, we are going to calculate the dynamic donut chart. Okay, so here the key thing is that it turns green when it's positive, red when it's negative. So let's call this net profit. Okay, so here we need the calculation for the label. Okay, so this is going to be the percentage. So this divided by that. Okay, this gives us 14%. Okay, then we are going to create the unused portion by using 1 minus. Right. Now, here's a trick. This is going to be the label. Okay, that's for the inside of the chart. This one. Okay. Then we need a helper. So basically, the helper is going to help us plot the red and green. Okay, so this one, when we exceed 100%, we get a full green. When we have also a percentage that is more than 100% and it's negative, we have a full red. Okay, so to do that, we are going to use this function. So we want a min of either 100%, that is 1, okay, or the absolute value of this. Okay, so this way we always get 100 if we exceed 100%, whether negative or positive. So currently we have this percentage. Okay, then we are going to repeat this calculation 1 minus. Then we'll create two donut charts. One is positive, the other is negative. Okay, so what we are going to say is that if this label is greater than or equal to 0, then show the helper values here. Okay, otherwise give us an NA. So it's going to switch. So the positive is going to be the green chart and the negative the red chart. So let's proceed. So if this label is greater than or equal to 0, then return this, otherwise NA, so that it doesn't plot it. Alright, then I will bring this down here. Okay, then I'll copy this, but instead of pointing to the 86, it will still be this one. Okay, so I have something like this. It's going to be the same calculation, but this time around we'll switch. So if this label, okay, is less than 0, okay, then bring that, otherwise NA. I'll close this, okay, and then copy this down. So again, I'll switch this up. Okay, so we have something like this. So what this means is that we can only have one donut chart at a time. So if it's positive, this shows. If it's negative, this will be red, this will be green. Then we just overlap it, okay, to give you that effect that you saw. Okay, so now let's proceed and create our chart. So let me just convert this into percentages. Okay, so highlighting this, I would go to insert, okay, and then pick a donut chart from here. Okay, so I'll take off this legend and then take off that. Then Control 1, okay, reduce the donut size to about 65. Okay, now we are going to go through a very simple formatting. So basically this part you see here, okay, that's the main charting area. For our positive is going to be green. Okay, so here I'm going to change it to a solid fill, and then I'll choose green here. While the rest, okay, I'm going to make this a faint gray, like this. Okay, so while we are here, I will select the chart, go to the format, and then take off the fill. Okay, now we can also take off the border lines as well. So here I'll come back and then take off the border lines, so no line in both cases. Okay, So this is going to be the green chart. Okay, now to maintain the same layout, we are simply going to copy. So I'll take this, Control C, step out, Control V. So I have this. Okay, so I can now format this one as well for my negative. Okay, so if I move this here, this is going to go off because I don't have any values here. Okay, so what I can do is, so I'll just temporarily make this negative. Okay, so that this switches. Then I can format this red. Okay, so Control 1, and I'll come here. Let me just switch so that you can see. So this is going to be red. Okay, no line. And then I'll switch to this other side, and I'm going to paint this the light gray shade. Okay, and then I'll choose no line for that as well. So this way, if I take off my label, okay, I now have these two. Okay, so I can now group this, but before I group, I'll just place it side by side. It needs a little bit patience. Okay, so I'll Control select this, come to shape format. Okay, so first I'll align top to make sure they are all aligned, and then I will align left. Okay, so this goes on that. Okay, then at this point I'm going to group. Okay, so I will group, and then I can now take off my shape outline. Okay, so this is now my complete chart. Okay, so now that we've completed our chart and our tick visual, we can now proceed and create our dashboard. Because of time, I've already laid out the basic format for our dashboard. So this is the layout of our dashboard. I filled the background with a light gray fill, and for each of these sections I merged the cells. Okay, so here you can put in your numbers, and then I have these gray backgrounds for the headers. Okay, then I have some border lines here. So in the end, we hope to use these as background to fill in some of these numbers and visuals that you see. Okay, so let's bring in our chart. So I'll come here, and because I've taken off the border lines, it can sometimes be difficult to see the border lines of the chart. So you can use Alt F10, okay, to bring the selection pane, and you see that I have my group chart here. So I will select this, and I can now take this, okay, cut, come to my dashboard, and then place this where it should be. Okay, so once I bring this in, I can now resize it, okay, to fit the area. I'm going to put in the tick mark and a text box, so you just leave enough space in here to get that done. Okay, so this is now here. I'm going to insert a text box for our label. So I'll go to insert, and I'm going to use a text box here. So I'll click on this and gently draw that text box. Okay, so over here. Okay, while this is selected, I'll go to my formula bar, place an equal to, and then I'll come here and then check the cell that contains my label and press enter. Okay, so at this point you can increase the font to about 14, okay, and then center it nicely, and I will use my font Berlin Sun, okay, to apply the font. Then take off the fill, so I'll take off the shape fill, and then no shape outline. Okay, so it's nicely centered here. Then I need to bring in that tick. So this is the tick that I have to bring in. So to do that, I'll come. This is sitting in a cell. Okay, so it's nicely centered because I'm going to copy this. So Control C, come here, okay, and then go to Home. Right, in the paste dialog box, I'm going to paste this as a linked picture. Okay, so again, this is now behaving like a shape or picture that I can zoom in and zoom out. So I'll gently place this here. Okay, now when you step out, you realize that there are some border lines around this. All you need to do to take this off is to take off the grid lines at the source. Okay, so I'll go to view and take off the grid lines here. So when I do that and I come back here, I have this nice green tick. Okay, so I'll come and I'll label this my net profit margin. Okay, so here we have an indicator to show us whether we made a profit in the selection or not. Okay, now we finished with this part. Let's quickly go in and then create the source for our changes. So I now have my category, then I have my current values, I have my previous, and then I have my changes. All I need now is to bring in my labels, right? So my labels are here. So I'll go to my dashboard, okay, and then select the first one. Okay, and because I don't want to distort the formatting, I'm going to copy this and paste formulas over here. Okay, so this brings in my label. Then for my current values, I'll go in and then pick the reporting value. Okay, Control R to copy this, right? Copy this, okay, and then I'll gently paste Control Alt V F, put in the formulas. Okay, so at this point we've brought in the staging for our current and previous. Then we go to our changes. So this is going to be the inverted change X. Okay, so I'll bring in the first one, and then again I'll copy this down, Control Alt V F. Okay, you realize that I have my conditional formatting in place, so I'll show you how I did this. So I'll go to Home, under conditional formatting, okay, manage rules. So this is the simple conditional formatting using data bars. I'm showing the bar only so that the numbers don't show. So the positive is a solid fill with green, and there's negative value and axis option here, which I formatted as red. Now the most important thing here is to choose cell midpoint as the axis settings, so that for the positive ones they come in on the right and the negative ones go on the left. Okay, so this is how I achieve this. So we have this in place now, and we can now proceed to do this other part of our visual. So here all I did was to represent each line of the income statement. Okay, so here I have my revenue, okay, and my costs of goods, like that. Okay, now I've merged these cells to bring in my current and previous. So I'll go in here, go to my current, and then fetch the current from this layout. Okay, then also pick my previous. So I'm going to pick my previous from here as well. Okay, then in here I'm going to bring in that percentage change. So I'll bring in an equal sign and then bring in my percentage change, which is here. I've already formatted this, okay, along the same green and red mark. So here this is another conditional format. So if I come to manage rules, you realize that I have set this rule to show red when it's less than 0 and to show green when it's more than 0. So this is what we have. So the last set in this visual is our sparkline. So again, the cell is merged. Okay, I'll go to insert and I have my sparklines here. I'll use the column version. So once I've selected the cell and I start this, the location range is shown here. Now I can reset this, okay, and click just the first cell, okay, so that it doesn't give me an error. Then my date range is going to be the calculation range from January all the way to December. Okay, so I'm going to select this and I'm going to click OK here. So when this is selected, we can use the sparkline settings to show our high point and our low point. Okay, then use the marker color to change the color for our high point, which we expect to be green. Okay, and then our low point can't be red. So it is the same setting that you're going to use for the rest of the lines. Okay, so because of time, I'm going to just copy this. So I'll copy this and then paste for each set. Okay, and then I'll go in and then change the sources. Okay, so that's how we are going to be doing this. So for example, we put in an equal sign, you go to your calculations and you pick it against the label. So this is going to be cost of goods sold. Then I'll come back and then pick my previous for cost of goods sold. Okay, then pick my percentage change for cost of goods sold, which is here. Then to change this sparkline, it's selected already. Okay, so the shortcut is Alt JD. Okay, then D to edit, E. Okay, then in my date range, I'll come in here and pick the range from January all the way to December. Okay, then I'll click OK. So it comes in nicely formatted as we want it. So I'm going to repeat the same process for the rest of the lines, and then we'll complete this part of the section. So I'll fill in all the sections for our income lines with the sparklines. So next up, we'll bring in our slicers and reformat these as well. So to do that, I have my slicers here. Okay, so I'll just come, select this, control select, okay, and then I'll cut this. Okay, so when I cut this, you see that temporarily everything goes off, but the moment I paste, it comes back up, right? So for our slicers, we can start with the month name, which we are going to split into 12. Okay, so I'll use the column settings to split this into 12, and then I'll just gently align this over the width of our layout. Okay, so that gives me something like this. Okay, then I'll do same for our year slicer. So our year slicer is going to come in split into 2. Okay, then I'll align it nicely. So we have that one too here. Then our division slicer is going to come in split into 4. So I'll place this, okay, here as well, and then fill in that and open this up. So the last thing we need to do here is to align and then format our slicer. So here I can align this to the bottom. Okay, so we have something like that. To format our slicer, we will just have to select the slicer, go to slicer settings, and I'm going to duplicate this existing one. Okay, I'm going to call this Finex, and I'll proceed with our whole slicer settings. So here the format is going to be the fill background, which is going to be the same as the background we chose for our dashboard. Okay, so there isn't going to be a border. I'll maintain the font as it is, so I'll click OK. Then I'll come to our header. So with the header, the font is going to be same, borderline is going to remain same, and there will be no fill here. Okay, then for our selected item with data, we'll just change this fill to a deeper fill. Okay, take off our border lines, and then the font is going to be white. Right, then I'll click OK. So these are the things that we need to change here. Then I'll click OK. So I'll come to our slicer settings and apply this here. So I'll come here and apply this as well, and nice. And then lastly, apply for this one as well. Okay, so we are almost there. I'll just put in the labels for our current and previous, so that we know which numbers. Okay, and copy this and then paste this here. Okay, so this now completes our final dashboard, and as always, the goal has been to make sure you can compare 2 years, see the changes visually, and be able to also use the slicers to drill into a particular division, a particular month, okay, And then you also have your indicators showing you which months you did well or not using these red and green. I hope you enjoyed the ride, and I'll be happy to see you practice and apply some of the concepts that you've learned.